Coming up next on the Passion Struck podcast.
Honestly, I don't think I would be in the business that I'm in right now if it wasn't for my son's death. It's changed everything. And I feel like I've helped so many families now through my practice and hopefully even through my book now, but mainly my practice. And I guess that's my purpose.
Welcome to Passion Struck. Hi, I'm your host, John R. Miles. And on the show, we decipher the secrets, tips, and guidance of the world's most inspiring people and turn their wisdom into practical advice for you and those around you. Our mission is to help you unlock the power of intentionality so that you can become the best version of yourself. If you're new to the show, I offer advice and answer listener questions on Fridays. We have long-form interviews the rest of the week with guests ranging from astronauts to authors, CEOs, creators, innovators, scientists, military leaders, visionaries, and athletes. Now, let's go out there and become Passion Struck. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 129 of Passion Struck, one of the top education and health podcasts in the world. And thank you to each and every one of you who comes back weekly to listen and learn how to live better, be better, and impact the world. I wanted to take this time to discuss a few of our recent episodes in case you missed them. Last week, I interviewed Rob Greenlee, who is one of my podcast idols and one of the foremost authorities on podcasting in the world. He's an inductee into the Podcast Hall of Fame and also was the former chairman of the Podcast Academy. We also had on 12-year-old animal activist Kate Gilman-Williams, who is using her platform to create a worldwide movement around saving animals. And just yesterday, we had on Liz Foslin, who is from the duo behind the best-selling book, No Hard Feelings, and the wildly popular Liz and Molly Instagram. And during that interview, we conducted the official launch of their new book, which just released yesterday, which is titled Big Feelings: How to Be Okay When Things Are Not Okay. And lastly, my solo episode from last week, which we call Momentum Fridays, was on how do we actively unlearn fears. Please check them all out if you hadn't had a chance yet to listen to them. Now, let's talk about today's guest on the show. Laurie Singer is a licensed psychotherapist and board-certified behavioral analyst who heads the successful Laurie Singer Behavioral Services in Camarillo, California. She uses integrated behavioral and cognitive therapy strategy to help those facing mental health issues. Laurie also recently released her first book titled You're Not Crazy: Living with Anxiety, Obsessions, and Fetishes. Laurie is an experienced and decorated endurance athlete competing in more than 100 marathons and many ultramarathons and Ironman triathlons. And today we discuss how she developed that early passion to compete in endurance challenges, what it was like for her to be indoctrinated into the Hall of Fame because of that endurance career she's had, why she believes that anyone who is stuck can become unstuck, how she develops plans that helps individuals gain confidence by achieving their goals that they set for themselves. We discuss the strong scientific evidence and understanding that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are highly interdependent, how she helps those who suffer deeply from anxiety and its manifestations, and so much more. Thank you for choosing Passion Struck and choosing me to be your host and guide on your journey to creating an intentional life. Now, let that journey begin. Laurie Singer, welcome to the Passion Struck podcast. I am so excited to have you as a guest today.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
I wanted to start out with something that we both have in common, and that is we are both long-distance runners. How did you first get into running and competing in long-distance sports?
I think because of my ADHD, I tend to just jump into everything without thinking about it, which has worked out really well for me in a lot of my life and the choices that I've made because I don't think about things. I just do it. Oh, you can run 100 miles. Really? Okay, I'll do it. And then I train for it. But running has really been, for me, I actually didn't start running until I was asked to join the cross country team at junior college. At the junior college level, when a scout was scouting the races, the local races in the area. I started running after the birth of my first daughter. And then after my son passed away, I was just kind of in a fog. And the cross country coach for Oxnard College asked me to come and run. And I was scared because I barely graduated high school. I almost failed out of high school, and running taught me how to structure. And so I was able to go back to school, and I ran cross country. I became the captain of the cross country team. And I actually graduated valedictorian of the junior college, which is amazing because I had to start at the baby math level. I could barely do anything. So I think the running, it taught me how to structure. It taught me that it built up my self-esteem. It built up my self-esteem in many ways. And I can't tell you how it influenced my life. Even with the death of my son, when he was in the hospital, I would go out on the balcony and I bring my jump rope. And while other parents were either smoking cigarettes or whatever they were doing out there, I was jumping rope. While I could, if my husband would give me a break, I would go jump rope for 30 minutes and come back in. So it was my therapy for a long time, and still is, actually. It still is my therapy. When I attended junior college, I was still juggling, grieving over my son, trying to raise a daughter at 5 years old is when her brother died, and trying to help her through that. And then at the same time, I miscarried twins with all of this going on. But I just really think that the running gave me balance no matter what. I was able to go back to that. And it's that feeling that I don't think you can get with anything else. I do endurance biking as well. And now I'm into backpacking long distances. So I never stopped.
Well, out of all the challenges that you've done, and you've just listed a whole bunch of things that the majority of people don't do, what has been the most challenging out of all the competitions that you've competed in thus far?
I think it's hard to say. Well, I know when I ran my first 100-mile run in a race, that was unbelievable. For me, it was unbelievable because you're getting ready you have to do it in a certain amount of time or you don't get a belt buckle. That sounds kind of silly, but that's what you don't get the award at the end. And so when you're getting ready to cross, it was just very emotional for me. Oh my gosh, I just completed 100 miles in the time frame. It had to be under 30 hours. And I think I was like 29 hours and 30 minutes or something. But whatever it was, I completed it. And what's interesting is that it's almost like the first time I ran 50 miles, it was very emotional. The first time I ran 100 miles, the first Ironman I ever completed, I think it just gives you a sense of, wow, I can really do this. It's mind over matter. And it's amazing what you can accomplish when you just set your mind to it.
Well, I had a podcast guest almost a year ago on the podcast. Her name is Cindy Hooper, and she lives in Ottawa. And her triathlon story to me was one of the most amazing ones I have ever heard. She did the Whistler full triathlon while still on chemotherapy, and 3 months after undergoing Whipple surgery for pancreatic cancer, where they removed a third of her pancreas, half her stomach, and her bile duct, along with other things. And to me, just the willpower to be able to do that in that condition is truly remarkable.
It's that mental toughness. But that's actually a catch-22 because sometimes we want people that compete or participate in long distance events where your threshold to pain is so high, it could not serve in your best interest as well. I know when I had to qualify to get in the 100-mile run, Western States, which is like the Boston Marathon of 100 milers. And at mile 12, I snapped my ankle one way and then I snapped it the other way. I was so disappointed because I was running it on my son's birthday. So it meant a lot to me. And then to have snapped it both ways, I went to the aid station And they said, you're never going to finish this race. And I just started bawling because I have to do this. I've worked so hard for my son. And one of the volunteers there could see how much it meant. And he said, you know what, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap up your ankle and you go as far as you want to go. And that's what I did. I went another 31 miles on a double fractured ankle until I just couldn't do it anymore. And they had to drag me off the course,
Wow.
take me to the hospital.
That itself is another remarkable story of your mind can do so much. I'm going to do a segue, and you've brought it up now a couple of times. But when your son was 2 years old, he was going through a tremendous sickness and unfortunately lost his battle with it. And I'm very sorry to hear that. A loss of any child is traumatic, especially one that young. But I wanted to ask, how has that event changed the course of your life and what you're doing today?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because, I still have a hard time, but I'm beginning to see now the bigger picture. My son was perfectly fine until about 2.5 months before his second birthday. And then he started crying and crying. And I thought, oh, he must have an ear infection. So I took him to the doctor and they said, no, he's fine. He doesn't have an ear infection. And then that night, again, he was just screaming, crying. I said, there's something wrong with him. So I went back and I waited before when they opened the door. What they found out after finally getting him to take a MRI and all that, what was happening was he had a tumor in his stomach that nobody knew about, and it was actually crushing his spine. That's why he was crying, because his spine was being crushed. And so we found out that's what it was. From that moment on, we pretty much lived at Children's Hospital in LA almost till the day he died. They told us he went paralyzed. And then they told us, well, you'll probably have a year with him. And I was really young at the time. I was 25 at the time. And we had a 5-year-old. And we're like, well, we'll just take whatever we can get. If we just have a year, we're going to take a year and we're going to spend time with them. But when we took him home that night, the next morning, he woke up and he was saying, night, 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 night. And we're like, what do you mean night, night? And what was happening was that now the cancer had gone to his brain. So he went blind. And he went back to Children's Hospital. And about 2 weeks later, he passed away. And I wanted to give back in some way. I didn't know what to do. So I read the book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And it said in there, if you do some type of tribute to your child that died, it puts meaning into it in some way. So I was a runner and my friends helped me organize a run. And with the money, what we did was we donated it to Children's Hospital, but we wanted to buy the kids' toys, because when we were there, our son, there was only 3 or 2 VCR machines back in the day, the VCR. So everybody on the floor, all those kids, nobody could watch TV because they didn't really have anything. They had no games for them. They had no toys. When we'd bring our daughter, she had nothing to do there. There was like a Mr. Potato Head with one eye and a lip or something. And so we said, let's give all of our money to the kids' playroom. At that time, it was called the kids' playroom. And now we just had our 35th annual event for Children's Hospital. And what we started turned into something much bigger. Now it's called it's the children's playroom, but what they have there is they have therapists that work with the kids. They have therapists that work with the siblings. I mean, they have computers there. It's just amazing what they have at that unit on 4 West in Children's Hospital. And they wouldn't have had it. We started it, which is unbelievable. And a friend of ours, unfortunately, her had a daughter with cancer and was on 4 West. And we were able to see how much it helped her. So now looking at the bigger picture, I can say, okay, maybe this is why he got sick. I don't know. I mean, I hate to say that he suffered so much. I wish it didn't have to happen that way, but we're able to help all these families and all these kids. And honestly, I don't think I would be in the business that I'm in right now if it wasn't for my son's death. It's changed everything. And I feel like I've helped so many families now through my practice and hopefully even through my book now, but mainly my practice. And I guess that's my purpose.
Well, I think that is going to be a great backdrop for the rest of today's podcast. And I'm sorry he had to go through any suffering at all. Well, I want to pivot from there to talk a little bit about your practice and specifically, what are the clientele that you try to help, especially using with what happened with your son as a backdrop as the lens through which you do it?
Initially, I was going to be a social worker because when I was in the hospital and the kids were sick and I would see the families, back then they had wards, by the way. We didn't even have our own room. We had to share a room with like 3 other families. Could you imagine? And we weren't allowed to spend the night in the room with the child. They would make us leave. But what my husband and I would do is we would sneak back in, and some nurses would let us stay, other nurses would not let us stay. But I wanted to give back to the families because I saw how some of them, we were lucky, we had a very close family. My mother and father-in-law and my dad helped us. It was tremendous support. But some families didn't have that. And I wanted to know, how can I give back? So I thought I'll work with families that have some type of disability or they need something in some way. And so I started working with kids with developmental disabilities once I got my bachelor's degree. And then I wanted to go out on my own. And of course, my ADHD, okay, I'll just get a license, 5 years later down the road with education, but it's all worth it. And so my first clientele was pretty much just with developmental disabilities and anywhere from age 2 to age 60. And then it started to build because I started to realize, more people started to seek me out and they were saying, well, I have anxiety or I have this OCD behavior, and they didn't have a developmental disability. And I thought, well, let's try what I'm using with these individuals and make the program for you, which was the cognitive behavioral therapy and the behavioral therapy combined together. And it was very successful, very successful. And that opened the door for just typical neurotypical individuals that have a lot of debilitating maladaptive behaviors that they want to change. And then parents started bringing their kids in saying, my child has severe anxiety or my child has obsessive compulsive disorder, or whatever it is. And so I started working with neurotypical individuals as well. And it's interesting because now I even have clients. I have like 5 clients that are in their 70s. One just turned 78. I find that so amazing because and a couple of them have said to me, I've tried for so many years to find a therapist and nobody could really help me, especially with the OCD part of it. There's always medication, but the OCD part of it, a lot of therapists, or at least the ones that they tried to work with, were not able to help them. And they're very determined and they've made significant progress. So it's exciting.
That is exciting. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time, now that you introduced that, kind of talking about some of the things that are going around in society right now, because I kind of wanted to ask you what you're seeing from your perspective. The part of the reason I started Passion Struck in this podcast is because I think a majority of the population today is living in what I call mediocrity and in service of self versus humanity. And I think there are groundswells of people globally right now who are seeking higher wisdom and purpose in their lives. And they're on all extremes, rich and poor, progressive and conservative, young and old. But mainly more and more people, I think, are feeling lonely, helpless, disengaged, battered, bruised, whatever you want to say it. And at this moment in time, there's a deep concern overall for where society is heading, the erosion of our human values, the assaults of our attention brought on by, the digital age and social media, and the growing rise of materialism and egomania. And I just wanted to see if that description is consistent to any of the things that you're seeing as well.
Oh, these things are, I'm not going to say out of control, because that's not going to do anybody any good. But I think, well, there's the good news is that people are seeking help, and that therapy is not such a negative term anymore, where people are okay with going to therapy, and they want to try and get themselves in a better place. I don't know. I have such a wide variety of individuals that I work with. Some of the elderly ones that I mentioned, they're skin pickers. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's an OCD behavior where they pick their skin to where it's bleeding. I mean, there's scabs all over. And this is brought on by anxiety. And I think a lot, I give them, they have to collect data on their behavior and find out what it is the triggers are. And typically the triggers are some of the social restrictions that are being placed on them now, or they're concerned about the future. Now, this is people that are in their 70s, but this also happening with kids that I work with that are 10 years old and 7 years old, where the social distance learning has isolated them. And one of them, in fact, when the first lockdown happened, he drew a picture of a tombstone and his name was on it. And because he was so depressed about the isolation. So working with him in that and trying to get him to focus on the positive and what are the positives helped him through that. So that's a younger one. And the older ones. Then I have the adolescent ones who are so wrapped up in the social media, and more so because they were unable or restricted in their socialization. They couldn't go to high school, they couldn't go to college. So what do they have? They have social media. So then they end up developing body dysmorphic disorder, because they're taking all these pictures of themselves and placing them on the internet. And what if they don't get a positive reaction? Then they think there's something wrong with them. And they go into the self-harm or suicidal ideation. So I think if you break it up, different age groups are suffering for different reasons. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. And I think one of the topics that we aren't talking about enough is the idea of loneliness. Because I think one of the things that we strive for in humanity is human connection. But when you're in lockdown or restriction or forced to not be able to go to school or be isolated at school and other things, you've got this newfound loneliness that's expanded upon the loneliness that was there before, because people are now trying to seek out human connection, but they're doing it online or in a digital way. And in many ways, it's not real. So what they're finding is it's compounding the loneliness that they already have, which to me is one of the backdrops to why, since 1999 in the United States, suicide rates keep rising 25% and above, and why that age group, I think it's 18 to 24, globally, the fourth leading cause of death right now is suicide. So it is a huge problem that it has only gotten worse, I think, during these past couple of years with COVID.
Oh, I agree 100%. 100%. It's interesting because my husband and I went to a concert last night, and sitting next to me, there was a gentleman. We all wore masks, but he had a double mask on. And I think there was an announcement that you have to wear your mask, and we're all wearing masks. And then he said to me, I had 7 of my relatives die from COVID. Now, this gentleman, because it's an older man, he was probably in his 70s. And I said, oh, that's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that. I said, I work in the mental health industry, and we have a lot of individuals that are suffering right now from the isolation. In fact, we had a woman jump out a window, and now she's paralyzed from the waist down. And he said, well, how come we don't hear about that? And I said, I don't know. I don't know, but it is a big issue and it's a big concern. I worry about my grandkids.
Well, I do too. And that's why, as far as brands that I associate myself with on this podcast, I've specifically partnered with BetterHelp and Talkspace because I know for me, it took me years to deal with my own trauma and my own issues. And, as a result, I reached a point where I was severely depressed, numb, um, felt apathy to the world. And I don't wish that on anyone. So for me, any way that I can make seeking a therapist easier, and something that people will do, whether it's that or bringing on guests like you, I'm trying to break down this societal um, image where people don't want to get therapy, because I think therapy is one of the most important things you can do for your physical health, mental health, spiritual health, and emotional health. Yet a lot of people try to avoid it because of the stigma. So what would be your advice? A senior executive, didn't think you had time for it, worried to show the world that things weren't going the greatest inside you, but you internalized it. How do you seek out that help?
Well, typically I will talk to people on the phone first, when they are interested or they've heard my name. But I tell them that my therapy, which is true, it's very solution focused. So I will listen to somebody's background because, of course, that's what how you developed your coping mechanisms that ended up being maladaptive later on in life. They weren't healthy, but I would say that my therapy solution focused. You have to be involved in it, collect data and all of that. Then I write an individualized behavior plan. And you have to want the change. I mean, that's the bottom line. What's going on in your life? Are you debilitated right now? Are you stuck? Do you feel like you're stuck? Because let's get you unstuck. Let's get you to move forward. You can only be stuck for so long. Or is this the way you want to live the rest of your life? Because you have two choices. You can get out of this and I can help you get out, or you can stay where you are, which would be a shame because you don't have to live the rest of your life like this. You have a choice. And let me help you with that choice. And really, that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book, is because I have a lot of physicians in the area, whether they're pediatricians, dermatologists, psychiatrists, and psychologists, who refer patients to me because they know that what I do works. And I don't want to keep a client for a long period of time. My goal is to give you the tools that you need to help you through this so you can use them throughout your life. That's the way that I feel.
Well, I think that's a great backdrop because I have spoken about this a lot on the podcast. I did a whole episode on the importance of choice. And when people come to me and they say, I hear what you're saying on the podcast, I heard the stories that you've shared, when they come back to me and say, well, where do I start? And I always say, it comes down to you making a choice. Because all around us, there are choices that we make every day. And the way I like to talk about it is, I think in our subconscious, we make most of these choices on autopilot. Where do you get your gas? How do you drive your commute? How do you drop your kids off for school? Your routine in the morning, where you shop for your groceries. But the most important choices in our lives, we also make on autopilot. And it's becoming intentional about those choices that you're making and doing something about them that I think makes the difference. So I think your whole point about choice is just something I wanted to highlight. And I think this is a great lead into your book, You're Not Crazy, Living with Anxiety, Obsession, and Fetishes. And, I have a book coming out here in a few months, but I always like talking to authors to hear, what was the motivation, that led you to write it?
Well, it was mainly pediatricians and a couple of psychologists. They said, Laurie, this stuff really works. You should write a book, like a self-help book. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. But then when I started the book initially probably 5 years ago, but then my mother got sick and developed cancer, which is a whole nother thing, because I never even thought I would help my mother out anyway, because she abandoned our family when I was 10 years old. My mom was an alcoholic and a drug addict and left our family, and my father raised all three of us. So, if
Wow.
somebody would have asked me, yeah, and so if somebody would have told me, Laurie, guess what? Your mom is going to come back in your life when you're in your 40s and you're going to take care of her when she's dying, I would have said, that's not possible. There's no way that's happening. But again, here we go back to, I had a choice. I had a choice to try and have a relationship with my mom. It would never be an ideal relationship. It would be the only relationship that we could have. Or I could ignore her and let her live on her own. And how sad would that be? So I made a choice, and I helped her, and I reintroduced her to her grandkids, spent time with her up until she died. And, every time that I saw her, the first words were out of her mouth were, I'm so sorry for what I did when you were young. I'm so sorry. So here she had to live with that her whole life. She's still not, up until the day she died, she probably regretted it, but we're all human. We all make bad choices. Hers was a really bad choice. But then again, that was her choice to leave us. It was very traumatic, which I didn't deal with until after my son's death. So talk about waiting to get therapy or help.
Well, so for the audience who doesn't know anything about your book, can you just give a little bit more color commentary on some of the approaches that you take in it?
I have 6 case studies in the book, and each case study, it tells a story about the individual and how their behavior manifested. What stories struck me as success stories and unbelievable, because some of these patients that come to see me, you never know if they're going to follow through and come through the other side. And then the ones that do, it's just so amazing to me that, again, it's the human strength and mentality, the same as in sports, that if they have that drive and you're there to help them through it, they can come out the other side. So what I do in my practice, which is a little bit different, is I combine cognitive behavioral therapy and behavioral therapy. And the difference is that cognitive behavioral therapy is, how do we change those irrational thoughts and replace them with positive thoughts? Because it can be done. Our mind is very powerful. And if we can retrain our thought process, because our thoughts create emotions, and those emotions are exhibited through our behavior. So if we can change our thoughts, we'll change our emotions, and that way we'll change our behavior. It really does work. So now the behavioral aspect of it is, how do we change our environment? Because our environment a lot of times influences our behavior. If we had a problem with alcohol, we probably would throw all of the bottles out in the house. We wouldn't be working as a bartender, right? And we would want to surround ourselves with people who are sober. So that would be one environmental change. In my book, I put what I do with each client, I put in the book. There's actually a workbook in the back of the book, and it has a data sheet in there. It has the visuals that I use, because visuals is a part of how do you change your environment. You could have something on your wall in your office that says, stay calm and think positive. And you look at that and you go, okay, I'm going to do that. It's a reminder, right? It reminds us to do that. And then how to write a motivational story. A motivational story is another tool that I have in my book and I use with my clients. When I gather information, I write a story specifically for them on how they can change their behavior and what that would look like for them. And in the book, there's a step-by-step on how to write your own story as well. And there's also a weekly schedule that you would fill out. So I would tell you, okay, read your motivational story in the morning, The signal plan, which I have in the book, is based on just a signal. Red means stop, yellow means make a choice, green means go. I'm going to use a strategy. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to think of something positive. And things like this that sound very simple. I've worked with doctors, pilots that have come into my office with OCD or some other behavior that they want to change. And some of them will say to me, well, that sounds very babyish. I don't even know if I should, I don't see how this is going to work. And I say, just give it a try. If you really stick with it, it will work. And it ends up that they follow it and it works. They start to engage in a new learned behavior, a replacement behavior. That's another thing I didn't mention, that let's say you're trying to quit smoking, what would you replace that behavior with? Not food, because we don't want you to get overweight, right? But maybe you would change the smoking cigarettes to chewing gum or going for a walk or anything else other than smoking. So you have a replacement behavior. Does that make sense, John?
It does. And I liked your whole bit about motivational storytelling, because at the end of the day, our life is a story. We are storytellers in our own life, and you've got an opportunity in it, because you're the main character in it, to either be the hero of that story or you can be the villain in that story. And that choice is up to you. If you start viewing your life differently, as if it's you were writing the story and someone's watching it play out, who would you much rather play? Because I'd much rather play the motivational hero than I would the diabolical villain. So I think what you're saying has a lot of truth to it. If someone hasn't gone through CBT, and I guess cognitive processing therapy is kind of a subset of CBT, is how I would look at it. What I found when I was going through it, that subconsciously I had buried these mental thoughts that were pervasively impacting how I was living life. And in many ways, they were causing me not to live who I authentically was, because I was hiding aspects of myself because of these conditions that I was putting on myself. CPT, it's called stuck points. But really, I was having these self-destructive thoughts. Well, when you start backing into that statement, it seems ridiculous, now that I look back, because think of all the people in authority I have dealt with throughout my life who haven't done me any harm. And so I was really caught in this subconscious stuck point, which I would have dealt with years ago, because until we started really going through some of the trauma I had experienced, I didn't even realize that subconsciously I was feeling this way until we really just started talking about it. So if you're not being real with yourself, nothing's going to change. But when I started really being real with myself and facing some of these inner demons, on the other side of it, I felt like this huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And then I went through prolonged exposure therapy. And then that was even more brutal, because you're reliving probably your most traumatic event again and again and again. But on the other side of it, what I would tell people is that we all face trauma. You can either hold on to it or you learn how to let it go. But holding on to it is not helping you in any way. It's only making you a much less viable person.
Yes, so that is it's interesting that you say that, because I didn't go to therapy until I was in my master's program at school, so that I could get my license to become a therapist, because I knew I wanted to practice behavioral therapy. So I thought, well, I guess I have to go to school to become a counselor. And so much like you, in a way, I never dealt with my mom's alcoholism. And what I witnessed in my house was horrible, living with an alcoholic parent and a drug addict at the same time. I kind of shoved everything deep inside me and never dealt with it. So when I did go to therapy to get my hours towards my master's, that's why I went to therapy. But then when I started telling her about my childhood, she just looked at me and said, well, that's not a normal childhood. And I said, oh, okay. And so that's when we started doing work together, and she dug stuff up out of me that I never thought I was going to deal with. And it's very difficult to, because you hide those feelings and emotions and events for so long. And then to kind of get them out of you, it's very traumatic, I think. It's a lot to deal with. But at the same time, it's like you said, it's as if you're wearing a backpack full of rocks and the backpack's taken off, and there's a sense of relief.
Yeah, I always kind of look at it now that I was wearing a shroud where I had a mask on, where I was showing a different version of myself to people than what was behind the mask. Now that the mask has been lifted, everything changed. You feel more fulfilled in what you're doing, your confidence goes up, so many benefits to it. All that said, a lot of people have misconceptions about therapy. So if you were someone listening to this podcast right now and you're completely on the fence about doing this, what are some of the misconceptions that you've seen, and what would you tell someone to do if they're sitting in that situation?
Well, I would say, if you can get a therapist that's recommended to you, if you know of anybody that recommends one, or your doctor, because I think that is a big thing. There's bad doctors, good doctors. And not everybody is a good fit for everybody either. Like, I might recommend somebody to you, and then you say, oh, that was a horrible fit for me. Why did you tell me to, why did you suggest that, Laurie? But I would go with somebody that maybe was recommended to you. And then I would ask yourself, like, again, in the beginning, when I said, is this how you want to live the rest of your life? You don't have to. You can be happy. Even if you're 70 or 80, there's years left in your life. And why wouldn't you want to? Why wouldn't you want to try to be a happier person, to live more contently? I don't know. That's the way I would look at it. What's it going to hurt? I mean, well, you have to divulge some things that might be painful, of course, but I've just seen people come out the other side and so happy and so thankful that they made that change. That's why I would suggest it. And listen, if you start it and you don't like it, it just means you're not ready yet. That's all. That's the way I look at it, because the tools, you're just not ready.
Yes. And I'm not a therapist. I'm not a medical professional in any way. I have taken antidepressants and other things that, for me personally, did more harm than good. But I am a true believer that if you do therapy and you work on yourself and you get your headspace right, and you're currently on that medication, there are paths for you to get off of it where you won't need it anymore. Because that's how I am today. I'm happy I'm off of it, because each one of those drugs has benefits, and I'm not going to say that they don't, but they also have side effects. And some work for some people and some don't. So,
and I agree with you on that. And some of my clients, they come in because they don't want to take medication. And I tell them, I could write you the best behavioral plan in the world, but if you are so anxiety ridden or you're so depressed, you will not be able to follow my plan that I've written for you. So, if you're completely against it, we can try it without, but if you're not able to utilize the strategies that I've written for you, then we need to go back and rethink that maybe you should just start on medication. Once you maintain where we want you for a while, then let's have you back off and take it from there. But initially, sometimes medication, you have to use it. Not always, but sometimes.
Sometimes a person is in such a depressed state or anxious state that is the intervention that's needed to allow them to do the other work. The analogy I use about therapy is, there was a time where I felt like I had a brick wall in front of me, and what I was doing was adding bricks on top of it. And on the other side of therapy, there was nothing there. And I got to lay new bricks down and build a completely new structure for the way I wanted my life to go. Because I don't think, whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, there's any point in life that you can't make changes and you can't decide to make your life different than how it's been, because the past is just that, and your future and present are completely different and malleable if you want them to be.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes if you get the right therapist, that's what they're there for. They're your support team. I think a support team is so important to have and to encourage you to stay on that new path. I think
Yeah, and
that's really important.
that's why I think this whole new science that's unfolding now around post-traumatic growth is so important because that's a great vehicle to use trauma to create growth in your life. I mean, that's really what being resilient is all about, is overcoming life's adversities and growing out of them to be a better person.
I agree. And I think, like you've suffered a lot of trauma in your life, but that's what's helped you and enabled you to help all these other individuals that watch your show or that talk to you and call you or work with you. You have that empathy and that ability, and you wouldn't have had that if you unfortunately wouldn't have had some of the trauma you experienced.
No, I wholeheartedly, I didn't want to admit it at first. I didn't want to be
I know.
vulnerable about it at first. Once you get the mindset that you want to help people and you don't want people to go through the hell that you've been through, it makes it easier over time to talk about it, to the point that I've recently had a podcast a couple weeks ago with Andrew Marr, who runs the Warrior Angels Foundation. And he talks about coming back from his time as a Green Beret in Afghanistan, and his whole life was falling apart. He was drinking throughout the day. He wasn't paying attention to his family. He was having cognitive issues, mental issues, depression, anxiety. And then he got help for it. And on the other side of it, he feels he's stronger now than he's ever been. But for a lot of people, if you don't take that point correction, that's exactly what's leading to people falling into despair and further going into homelessness and other things that we talked about. Well, I wanted, Laurie, to give you an opportunity as we're nearing the end of the podcast to tell the audience, and I will put it in the show notes, how they can learn more about you.
How they can learn more about me. Well, I think
And reach out to you if they want to. Yeah.
Sure. Right. So there's the website for my book is you'renotcrazybook.com. So it's YOURE, notcrazybook.com. And you can email me from there and get in touch with me. And I'm always happy to talk to anybody that wants to reach out to me. So they can email me from there. I also have another website for my company, which is LaurieSingerBehavioralServices.com. And you can reach one website from the other. So either way, you can get a hold of me.
Okay. And I always end the episode by doing just a quick rapid round of questions. It's kind of the first thing that comes to your head. So the first one I was going to ask, and it's one of my favorites, is what are 5 things that you can't live without? And they could be people, places, things.
Okay. Well, I would have to say, okay, it's funny. It used to be my kids, my grandkids. So I'll say family. I guess it would be my family. I love my family. And then it would have to be running or biking, any athletic event. I don't know if I could live without. And 5 things, that's a lot of things. Travel. I like to travel. New experiences now that I'm into backpacking. And the 5th thing would be my dog.
Okay, well, those are a great 5. Is there a personal motto that you tell yourself or advice that you live by?
I don't think I'm not sure if I do. I maybe it would have to be try and think positive, and also that you can't control everything, which is that's a hard one. That you have, we're all human and we just can't control everything. We just have to succumb and be flexible.
If there was someone that you have never met before, whether they're deceased or alive, that you had the opportunity to have a cup of coffee with, who would that be?
Somebody who's deceased or alive that I've never met, and I could have a cup of coffee with them. I think it would have to be, I want somebody that I can have an intelligent conversation with, and maybe, I don't know if I could relate to him. Let me think. Maybe Skinner on behaviorism.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
Yeah, I've always wanted to meet Tesla. I just always think it would be such a fascinating conversation to understand how he could know all the things he knew during the time period he lived. And then the last one is I've had an opportunity to interview a number of astronauts on the podcast. And so a fun question I like to ask is, if you got selected to the mission to Mars and the world government said, as you went to Mars, you could establish an edict or a law or a way of living, what would be one thing that you would put in place?
An exercise program.
So physical health. Okay.
That's right. Physical health. That's exactly what I would do, because I really think that our physical health influences our mental health. And I when I work with somebody, I always make sure that that is in their weekly agenda, that they do some type of physical activity, because I really do think it helps.
My morning habit is the first thing I do before I do anything is I do physical exercise because I think it does so much to wake up the body, get your systems going, get your energy pumping. And I try to get a sweat early in the morning because I think it releases endorphins and other things, helps you with cortisol and gets your whole body going. So complete believer in that. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for coming up. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, and it sets the tone for the day. I'm the same way, I mean, I think it sets the tone for the day. You're out there, you're exercising, and sets the tone. I think it's a positive way to start the day.
Absolutely agree. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all your expertise. I know the audience is going to love this, and I really appreciate you doing it.
I had so much fun. Thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you again, Laurie.
All right, take care. It was really nice talking with you.
I thoroughly enjoyed that interview with Laurie, especially since I also have a bit of an endurance athletic background myself. And I wanted to mention, if you're new to the show or you just want to introduce this to friends or family members, we now have episode starter packs, both on Spotify and on our website. These are collections of our fans' favorite episodes that we organize by topic to make it so much easier for you to get acquainted to everything that we do here on the show. Just go to passionstruck.com/starter packs to get started. And if you'd like to watch these in addition to listening to these episodes, you can check out our YouTube channel at John R. Miles, where we have over 270 different videos, both long form content like today's and much shorter videos we call Mindset Moments, which are typically 2 to 5 minutes long. Please go check it out and subscribe. And lastly, we so much appreciate all the 5-star ratings you guys are giving to us. And if you truly loved today's episode or the podcast in general, please consider giving us a 5-star rating. We have over 4,800 of them, and they go such a long way in helping the popularity of our show, as does sharing these episodes, if you like them, with friends and family members. Now, go out there and live life passion-struck. Thank you so much for joining us. The purpose of our show is to make passion go viral. And we do that by sharing with you the knowledge and skills that you need to unlock your hidden potential. If you want to hear more, please subscribe to the Passion Struck podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts at. And if you absolutely love this episode, we'd appreciate a 5-star rating on iTunes and you sharing it with 3 of your most growth-minded friends so they can post it as well to their social accounts and help us grow our Passion Struck community. If you'd like to learn more about the show and our mission, you can go to passionstruck.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter, look at our tools, and also download the show notes for today's episode. Additionally, you can listen to us every Tuesday and Friday for even more inspiring content. And remember, make a choice, work hard, and step into your sharp edges. Thank you again for joining us.